prosecution got up and said, no, you don't have to do that. They're all accessories. When you have a group of people that commits a crime, they're all accessories. John Adams got up and said, well, that is only if the group is an unlawful assembly. If you are unlawfully assembled and you commit a crime, then yes, you're all part of it. But these men were commanded to be there by their captain. It was lawful. The prosecution got up and said, actually was not really that lawful. During that night, there were soldiers going out. We have witnesses saying that they saw groups of soldiers walking around with swords in their hands, threatening people. So the defense got up and they had witnesses. Only two. They had a whole lineup, but after two of these witnesses getting up and saying, well, actually, the people in Boston were running around with weapons. No wonder the soldiers had swords out. The people in Boston had weapons. They were milling about. And John Adams said, stop. Stop everything. We've got to adjourn. We have to stop this trial. Let's pick it up again tomorrow. So, okay, we'll stop. We'll adjourn until tomorrow. And John Adams took his assistant attorney behind closed doors. He said, we cannot do this. We cannot have people testifying that there was Bostonians roaming the street with weapons. That will look terrible politically. What will England think of us if they think that we're a bunch of, just a mob of crazy people down here? And his assistant said, well, but we have to argue this. It's the truth. We're defending these soldiers, and the soldiers were in a position where there was gangs of Bostonians running around with weapons threatening them. And Adams said, no. If you go this route, I will quit this case. I will not be on a case that paints the Bostonians out as being unlawful, terrible politically. And this is the only time that I know of that John Adams didn't fully prosecute the defense of these British soldiers. He couldn't quite cross that line. But he said, you know what? We don't need to do this anyway. We've got a strong case. All we got to do is stand up there and say that even if there were other British soldiers running around with swords drawn, intimidating people, you can't hold this group of guys responsible for what the other group did. And that's what John Adams did. He closed his case saying, facts are stubborn things. If an assault was made to endanger their lives, the law is clear. They had a right to kill in their own defense. Well, the jury deliberated at some length, and they came back. And they found 6 of the men not guilty. They found 2 of the men guilty, but not of murder. For these 2 men, they felt they could pin down a specific victim killed by a specific soldier. And they said it was manslaughter, because they were in a threatened situation, but they still acted unlawfully. The penalty for manslaughter was death, but these 2 men were not put to death. They argued something when they were sentenced. They claimed the benefit of clergy. The benefit of clergy was this old British law where if you were a clergy member, you could ask to be held by a church court instead of a public court. And so the way that you proved that you were clergy is you just had to prove that you could read. Because back then, if you could read, you were probably clergy. Now, this wasn't true in the 1700s anymore, but it was still this old law in the books that these 2 soldiers just had to get up and say, hey, we can read. And they gave them a verse to read. It was called the head verse, because it would save your head if you could read it, or if you could at least memorize it. It was this old thing back to England. So these 2 soldiers were found guilty of manslaughter, but instead of being killed, they were sentenced to have an M branded into their thumbs and have all their personal belongings taken away from them. And they said that as these men were approached with the hot brands, with the M in the thumb, that they burst out crying. And they branded the M with the idea that if they were ever found guilty of manslaughter again, they could see the M on their thumbs, and they couldn't claim the benefit of clergy twice. They would have to be put to death. So John Adams was actually very pleased with all this. He said that the Boston Massacre, quote, on that night, the foundation of American independence was laid. Which some people would argue with. But it's true that by not quite giving the Bostonians what they wanted here, it continued this sense of injustice in American colonies. That they didn't quite get the justice they wanted. And they consequently held a yearly holiday for the Boston Massacre for the next 13 years, up until it was replaced by Independence Day. They held this and became a huge political thing. And John Adams actually felt that the verdict he got was exactly what he wanted, which is probably the case because the juries were constituted in a very strange way. They would have loyalists and patriots on the juries, and if you look at this trial, there's a lot of weird little things that happen that make you think that John Adams kind of manipulated it pretty much how he wanted. He got the exact verdict he wanted. He didn't look too unlawful in the eyes of the British. He showed the British that the colonies respected law and the rule of law, and they weren't going to just resort to mob justice and string these guys up. And besides, he didn't blame the soldiers. Genuinely, John Adams, he felt they acted dumbly, but he believed that the real murderers were the British leaders who ordered a standing army to occupy Boston.